Have you ever said something that you later regretted or wished you hadn't said? Maybe in the heat of the moment, something came out that wasn't really you at your best self. Well, many of us have that experience. You're not alone in that. And mindfulness can help, especially in the complex world of communications. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Mindfulness Voyage. My name is Ted Meissner. If you are returning to this podcast, welcome back. Glad you could join us again. And if you're new to this, I'm so glad you could join this community. Communications is difficult even under the best of circumstances. There's everything you're going through, how you put stuff into words. Are you properly conveying what you mean to? All of that. And then there's the receiving end of what it's like for the other person. Our guest today is a well-trained mindfulness teacher as well as a scholar of communications, one of the best people to talk about this complex area of mindful communications. Come on, let's learn some more.
Our guest today is Dan Huston. Dan, thank you so much for being here and good to see you again.
Good to see you too. Thank you.
I've been really looking forward to this conversation because you and I go back a ways, and you've been a guest on my other podcast, Present Moment Mindfulness. And I wanted to update things because it's been a few years and the field of mindfulness has changed so very much. But what I'd like to do is start by having you just talk a little bit about your course, and then we'll go into some detail on that.
Okay. Well, thanks again for having me. It's nice to give you an update. Yeah, it has been a while. So when you say my course, I'm assuming you're referring to the Communicating Mindfully course that the first podcast was about. And that's, pretty much the same as it was back when we first spoke. But what has changed is that course has inspired more work at my college that has ultimately led to a mindful communication certificate. And I could go on and on,
What I want to hear about. Yeah, tell us about that, because expansion that's a really big deal. And I got so excited when you mentioned that when we spoke a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, it is a big deal. Thank you. So just to kind of recap, I guess, before I get into the specifics of the certificate, the way that has all evolved. It's 25 years ago or so, I created the Communicating Mindfully course, and I was the only person teaching it. My only hope at that time was that it wasn't misunderstood and shut down. So that was my big goal. And fortunately, my department head was very supportive. So I could do what I was doing without trying to hide it. And over a couple of years, other faculty would stop me in the hallways or at the photocopying machine and say, Dan, I really see a difference between the students in my classes who have taken your course and those who haven't. They're more engaged in their homework. They're more participatory in class. They're more respectful of their peers. And, what are you doing? So that was obviously gratifying to hear. But I quickly realized that I couldn't answer that question, with a quick hallway chat. So I offered to give professional development training to any faculty who were interested. And again, this was 25 years ago or so, or 20 years ago. And so I offered a condensed version of that course. So we would meet once a week for a couple of hours for the semester. And I got faculty from all kinds of places. So early childhood education, human services, information technology, and engineering, nursing, so just a ton. And as you know, when people study mindfulness, often their lives change for the better. And so that happened. And then those faculty started to recommend the course to their students. And that increased demand beyond what I was capable of handling. So I needed to figure out how to teach people how to teach my course. So that took a couple of years. And I finally sort of figured that out. I think now, I'm better at it than I was then. And then a cohort of the people who had taken that original professional development training kept meeting with me, and that inspired more curriculum development. So I am leading up to the mindful communication certificate here. So we ended up with infusing mindfulness into not only the communication course, but English composition, introduction to literature, and now more recently, introduction to psychology. And then once it became an official certificate, we added a 1 credit capstone that students take in conjunction with their internship. And so the whole certificate is designed to not be a standalone certificate, but basically a kind of minor in mindful communication, because mindfulness is infused for the most part in general education courses they would be taking anyway. So it's not like they have extra courses, with the potential exception of the capstone. But what's also really cool about the way that's evolved is that several departments have recognized the value of that. So they just have built the mindfulness versions of those general education courses directly into their programs. So
Oh,
students they don't have to go out of their way to do it.
yeah, what a fascinating growth. And what I find interesting about this, Dan, is that with the humble beginnings of including some mindfulness in communications, that people started to notice it was making a difference.
Mm.
And it wasn't just that these students are doing better, it's now faculty and staff become interested in this, taking it, learning more about it, and infusing it. So it's just this organic, beautiful organic growth of having mindfulness, not just in communications, but touching other areas, because as you were well aware, mindfulness can impact all the different areas of our lives. And to see that growth, I imagine that feels pretty gratifying.
Yeah, extremely gratifying. And yeah, thank you for that emphasis too on the organic growth and beauty of it. It was so great to have it evolve without me sort of selling it, to just have it speak for itself and then gather its own momentum. And that's basically been my approach over the years, is to notice when that's happening at key junctures and then step in, right? So, okay, it's growing sort of on its own. Now it needs a little more help from me. And things are ripe for that to happen. So I'll do what I can because I believe in it.
Yeah. So let's shift a little bit with those who may not be familiar with communicating mindfully just as a general topic or idea, understanding that there are a lot of different layers to mindfulness, lots of different layers to communications.
Mm.
What are some of the big themes that someone who's interested in this or curious about it but has no idea what it's about? What are some of those big hits you might share with the listeners?
Mm. Well, the basic underpinnings of it can be summarized in a formula that I write on the board for students on day one. And the formula says mindfulness plus communication theory equals emotional intelligence. And what that means is that over the course of the semester, we will study ways to develop our ability to be fully present, which is mindfulness. And those ways are meditation and a key assignment called awareness notebooks we can talk more about if you'd like. And then another thread is basic communication theory. And it really is basic. It's conversation skills, listening skills, nonverbal behavior, assertive behavior. That's sort of the gist. And what I explain to students is that as they are increasing their ability to be in the moment, over time, part of what they'll notice when they're opening to the moments of their lives will be the communication concepts that we're studying, right? So they'll notice their inner monologue in that moment. They'll notice the way they're being influenced by other people's nonverbal behavior. They might notice habitual patterns of behavior that they have and recognize that they have other choices. And so over time, I explain that probably will happen, and that therefore they'll be making maybe different kinds of decisions about how to communicate in that moment. And often those decisions reflect increased emotional intelligence, which is the tail end of that formula.
Okay. And what I find so interesting about this is that formula, which I know you have on your website, communicating-mindfully.com, yeah, is that it's really such an interrelated dynamic process that all of the aspects of an engagement with mindfulness, of living mindfully, really show up in communications, because mindfulness is not just sitting on a mountaintop in isolation. It's team sport and it is an active thing where you choose how you are in each moment.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree for sure. It's important to point out that it's not that our approach to mindfulness and meditation is not about stress reduction, relaxation. We don't play soothing music in the background, or certainly not lighting incense, or floating around the room. None of that is part of this. Although often people do feel more relaxed as a result of the meditations that they do in this course. That's not the goal. That's just a nice perk.
Yeah, this is something that you and I were talking about before we started recording today, and I'm so glad you brought this up, Dan, is that you do this in a very, very much the same way I do, in that the drop-ins that I was talking about prior to recording today is a little different than people might expect, where they're used to downloading a recording from an app, and it has the music playing in the background, the rain sounds, the whatever it is, with an intention of relaxation. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I find interesting, and I'm curious to hear your response to this as well, I will tend to ask participants in my courses and in talks that I give, what's it like to be you? And people will describe various ways in which that might show up. And then we'll do a short meditation. And then I'll ask them, how are you feeling? How are you now in this moment? And it's a very different kind of characterization what comes up after just a few minutes. And then I point out, okay, some of the words showing up here is calm, relaxed, energized, stuff like that. And I point out I didn't use any of those words in the guidance. When I asked you how you were, I didn't say, tell me about your stressed life, or no. These are things that are natural outcomes for many people, not all. Of course, it's very, your individual mileage may vary, right, but that's something that often comes up with this. It can be therapeutic without being therapy. It can be calming without that as an underlying intention. Just being present brings with it so much.
Yeah, nice. I do a similar exercise sometimes before in order to kick off meetings with faculty that are involved in the mindfulness work. And yeah, I get the same kinds of responses. However, not always, right? I mean, sometimes you might be flooded with your to-do list, and now you're more stressed than you were before the meditation, right? And that's okay, right? And even when we practice meditation regularly, it's not always the same, right? And in my mind, that's really important that people recognize that, and that one of the key abilities that I think comes from the practice of mindfulness and meditation is the ability to sit with discomfort,
Yeah,
right?
because that's going to come up in whatever we do.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's a fundamental skill. And so that's really important to recognize, because when people are meditating, if they feel discomfort or they're distracted continuously, they often say to themselves or to me, I can't do it, right? Or meditation just must not be for me. So that's often a misconception that we need to work through.
Yeah, yeah. There's an idea in mind that I'm going to be calm, and these rampant thoughts are going to go away. And it's like it's a little different than that.
Yeah.
And maybe yeah, thoughts are going to be here. And what's it like to engage with those as a way to work with them instead of trying to suppress or avoid, which
Mm.
tends not to work so well for many of us.
Yeah. Yeah. Or, right? I mean, maybe we have uncomfortable thoughts come up and we can figure out a way to work with them productively. Or one of the things that has been really neat to me is we can accept that they're there, not pursue them, right? If it feels like it's not the right time or it wouldn't be productive. And then because we're not feeding them, they will like give up, you know,
Yeah,
and just go
yeah.
away, at least for a little while.
Yeah, it's such an interesting and fairly consistent phenomenon that just having that open-handed, open-heartedness, open-mindedness with them, allowing them to come and go. They come and they go. That
Yeah.
is a tendency to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And that too, I think, is a really valuable skill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about the having had faculty and staff notice that this was having some effect on students and then wanting to participate in it and learn more about it themselves and having this organic growth. I'm wondering what are some of the ways in which this has shown up for students? You mentioned before we started recording there are some papers, and what are the kinds of things that you're seeing showing up?
Mm, mm. Um, well, let me pull up the two papers that I uh, printed out before this podcast. I'll start with the sort of more simple one, I suppose. Um, one of the assignments that I give in English composition that infuses mindfulness are what I call learning logs. And so they have to do one a week for the first 8 weeks or so, where they're just simply stating uh, a specific experience that they had during the week where they experienced a strong emotion. Ideally, as it related to writing, because this is a writing course. But if that didn't happen, then it can be any other time too. And then explain how that emotion impacted their behavior in that moment, whether that was productive or unproductive. If it was unproductive, would any of the following mindfulness techniques, hesitate to use that word, have been useful? And how does it relate to the learning stance that they all identified in the beginning of the term? So the learning stances, just quickly, were written by Gail Schur, meditation teacher, author, poet, and there she has, like, I forget how many, about 10 learning stances that she identified, which are basically beliefs that people have that have held them back in education and probably more places than that. So in the beginning of the term, I have students identify from that list one or more that they have experienced. And then throughout the term, there are opportunities to reflect on how has what we've been doing in this course related to that learning stance, and are you starting to be able to better manage that?
Mm-hmm.
So the learning logs are one such area to stop and say, hey, does that relate to the learning stance? So this student, I'll just call her Jill, wrote about a time when she was trying to write a paper for my course while commuting on a bus. And I had this student also in the Communicating Mindfully course. So she entered this class already with some basic mindfulness abilities and understanding. And so she noticed on the bus a series of emotions that she experienced. A, frustration, bouncing bus, trying to write. Then once she got into it, heightened creativity, inspired, happy. And then she took a momentary break. She was feeling present, looked out the window, beautiful sunrise. It's an early bus ride. Then flooded by a bunch of to-dos, right? So I mean, a lot of awareness going on, there. And then she mentions that when she felt that first frustration, she says, quote, "I didn't let it consume me." Right. And we all know what that's like when we feel frustrated to then pursue it with rumination, catastrophizing, etc. And then she goes on, she says, "I adjusted my seat, put the computer to the side for a minute, and tried something different. I recognized with acceptance that I was being irrationally angry. The situation was not that bad. So the bouncing bus, was not as bad as she was making it out to be. After naming the emotion, which is a technique that we use in the Communicating Mindfully course during meditation. I'm sure you're familiar with it. After naming the emotion, it seemed to dissipate and I could start writing. Right. So that's a quick example of how an awareness of emotions and mindfulness can help in the writing process.
Yeah, and noticing in that journaling process, which I also use in my courses because it helps identify what's going on and take a closer look at it.
Yeah.
What a lovely shift that occurred and fairly quickly within the irritation, being a bouncing bus. Oh, hang on. What's actually going on here and how that really radically shifted the experience itself.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing to me. It reminds me of when I took some training to teach MBSR, the practicum. I don't think they call it that anymore, but anyway, it was back then. The teacher asked those of us in training. So those of us in training, as I'm sure you know, would basically take the course twice, right? With the teacher as trainers, or people learning to be trainers, and as regular participants. And so she asked us when we were in the course as regular participants to be aware of any key moments that seem to just shift things, either for better or worse, and then to come to our training class ready to share those observations. But it's amazing to me how the awareness and attitude that we bring to a given moment can have such drastic influences on what happens next.
Yeah.
Right, both internally and externally, and how we're influencing other people. It's a really key thing to consider. I mean, you mentioned meditation and mindfulness is not just about sitting on a mountaintop in isolation, and this is one big example of how it can have a much broader impact than that.
And you had another student paper mentioning something as well.
Yeah, this one is an example of the final paper that I give in English Comp. And so the thrust of this assignment is, did the mindfulness work that we did in the course help you to manage the learning stance that you had identified in the first week? And if so, how, basically? And so this student chose two learning stances. One is scattered, so having a lack of focus, continuously distracted, which a lot of students experience.
And some of us teachers too, I will admit.
Yeah, true. And Maverick, what Cher calls Maverick, which is being really wedded to doing things your way, even when you get good advice. Like the way Cher describes it is that it's, oh shoot, I thought I had that right here. Yeah. Listening to others, even their good advice, smacks of quote unquote party line. So this student experienced both of those things. And she also didn't like writing. So she said when it came to her writing, she usually was overwhelmed and frustrated with the entire process. It was hard to find motivation. That led to procrastination, which led to stress. So that's what she was coming into the course with. And she said the mindfulness, the work that we did during the course didn't help her to modify the scattered habit, but it did help her to manage it. And so she said, gotta need my glasses to read this part of it. She developed, largely through the meditation, an ability to notice her thoughts. So when she was scattered with all these thoughts bombarding her, she was able to notice that happening and look closely at those thoughts and ask herself, which of these or any of them useful, right? And if not, she increased her capacity to let those go, as we were talking about earlier, right? And then focus. And I'm not quite sure, she didn't elaborate on the connection between that ability and what she then says, but she then goes on to say that when given a new assignment, I would first sit down and create a plan or outline that I could go back to when I lost focus. So her procrastination, she wasn't procrastinating, right? I tried to allot extra time when working on an assignment to accommodate distractions and or take breaks. I broke down assignments into smaller pieces so I'd only have to focus for shorter bits of time. So these are some of the ways that she discovered she could manage her scatteredness. And it's really cool to read things like that when they come up, because these techniques that she discovered for herself are the kinds of techniques that if you were taking a study skills course or something like that, people would suggest, right? But often those suggestions just go in one ear and out the other. But when we as individuals, or when students as individuals make those kinds of discoveries and realize, oh, doing this is good for me, right? That's way different than doing it because someone told you you should.
Yeah, exactly. And what this shows is that an individual noticing these difficulties, finding a helpful, appropriate response to them. How am I going to adjust? I break things into smaller bits so I can get through them and work with what's showing up here. What are the cards I was dealt? What are the ingredients of this moment?
Yeah.
What that shows to me is the underlying success of this work and your teaching with them is they're learning how to adjust on their own from what they're finding. There's not a reliance on having to be told what to do, but that they can now think and work with difficulties for themselves and find maybe even some unique ways that we haven't thought of before.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. That's a really important point. And one that I really hope is happening, and clearly it is. And in my mind, I mean, like if you take the Communicating Mindfully course, one of the things they have to do in that course is give speeches. But probably it's a pretty small percentage of my students who will actually have to give speeches in their lives. Um, but what's more important is developing the abilities that you and I are now talking about, right? So I think there are a lot of skills that go way beyond the communication skills, the writing skills, et cetera, that just will have the potential to permeate every aspect of the students' lives and give them greater joy, greater confidence, um, more ability to weather storms in their lives. And all of that is just really gratifying and hopefully contributing to, you know, a better world.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're seeing this in the microcosm of the university, that there was this noticing of a shift and there was this organic growth, and that continues. And in fact, this is a good segue to one of the things I wanted to ask you is that for those who may not be at the university and have direct access to the course as a student there, you also have a book. And I'm wondering if you just take a moment and tell people a little bit about that for those who, again, might not have the opportunity to take a course directly with you at this time.
Oh, sure. Well, first of all, it's not a university. I'll just say it's a community college,
Community college, yeah.
NHTI, Concord's Community College in Concord, New Hampshire. And even if people aren't students there, I'll just put in a plug for our workforce development center. So we do give trainings in mindfulness there, and we could customize those, or we don't really have I guess customization is the way we're going right now. So that's an option. The book is called Communicating Mindfully, and it's put out by August Learning, a small publisher. You could just Google that and come up with the site if people are interested in purchasing that. And basically, that's the textbook for the Communicating Mindfully course. And the way it's set up is that each chapter discusses an aspect of mindfulness, some communication theory, the way those influence one another. It ends with an application journal assignment that people could always do on their own if you're not taking the course. And it also gives you access to the meditations that are part of the course. So each chapter has one meditation that corresponds with it.
Yeah. And as someone, and you've seen I do this, I have my own copy of this and I have for many years. This is a wonderfully comprehensive book on the topic. And for those who are watching, Dan has been my go-to person around communicating mindfully for many years and for many years to come because of this work and because of his expertise with it, his understanding of mindfulness and communications, because those are different disciplines that really do overlap so beautifully and leading to an emotional intelligence. So I finally asked Dan, is there anything else you'd like to share with the listeners who might be curious about how to build their capacity to communicate mindfully?
Hmm. Hmm. You know, for me, it was this whole thing has been a very organic process. So for me, as you know, and as I say in the introduction to my book, I got involved with it when I was going through what ended up being a divorce. And so it makes sense that an increased ability to communicate effectively was a byproduct of my mindfulness practice, because communication was so fundamental to my life at that point. But I guess so. If you're interested in exploring mindful communication, I think starting a meditation practice would be a logical place to start. For a lot of the reasons that you and I have talked about so far, that it's not just about relaxation, but that it helps you to be more in touch with your thoughts and your emotions, and therefore more able to express them. And also more brave about accepting them in the first place. And so you can get a lot of mileage just from that.
Thank you. Our guest today, Dan Huston, Professor of English and Communication. Dan, thank you so much for being here. And again, I will have links to spots like communicating-mindfully.com, as well as a few others where links can be found for this episode. Dan, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Ted. It's been really fun to talk with you again.
Thanks so much for tuning in today. I hope you enjoyed this episode and our conversation with Dan Huston. I know I always like catching up with Dan. Remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. We'll see you next time.